Hello Year 4. Today's lesson on the Romans follows on from the one we did last week. First of all, let's have a quick look at our timeline. So well done to Ben and to the rest of you who spotted my other mistake in my timeline, which was that Queen Victoria's reign didn't end in 1904, it ended in 1901, so that's correct. So I want you to think back to our work on World War I last year, and in particular the word empire. Can you remember what an empire is? Very good. So an empire is when one country decides that it's going to conquer other countries so that it can take things that that other country has. So it might be food, it might be precious things like metals, or it might be people, so they've got people to work for. So we can use this presentation to see how the Roman Empire spread. This is a map of the whole world. Can you see where we live? I'll give you a couple of seconds. You could possibly point to our country on your screen. That's right. So we live here in Great Britain on the British Isles. The Roman Empire started in Rome, which is a city in Italy. If we go back to the world map, we can see Italy here. So quite a long way from the British Isles, but not a huge distance. And around about 800 BC, the Romans decided that they wanted things that other people had. It might have been food they wanted, or precious metals, or people to do the work for them. So they went out and conquered other countries. What does conquered mean? That's right. It means to overcome or take control of a place or a people by military force. That means going to war and using swords and violence in order to get what you want. Do you think that's a kind thing to do? In the next series of maps, we will see a few different things. We want to look for the red, which is going to be the land that's controlled by the Romans. The green is other people's lands, and the dark green is where the land is controlled by Celtic tribes. At the bottom, we'll see this timeline, and you can see we're going to start at 800 BC, so 800 years before Christ, and we'll end at 305 AD. Now I want you to look especially for 117 AD, because that's the point at which the Roman Empire is the biggest. Okay, so we'll start in 237 BC, where we can see that the only red is Italy, so the only land controlled by the Romans is Italy, Sicily, and another part of, I think that's Sardinia. Okay, but at the time, the Romans called Italy Italia. Romans had different place names for everything. So we're going to move on to 133 BC now, and we can see that by now, about 100 years after 237, the Romans have gone over and conquered parts of North Africa. They've conquered over here, so Greece and Turkey, and parts of Spain as well, which they called Hispania. Now we'll move on to 44 BC, where we can see the empire is getting really big now. They've conquered even more of North Africa. They've not only got Italia and most of Hispania, but now they've conquered France, which they called Gaul. We'll move on to 79 AD, so after Christ now, and I want you to pay special attention to this area. Can you recognize this as where we live? The Romans called this place Britannia. And in 79 AD, you can see that they've conquered Britannia, a lot more of France. What did they call France again? That's right, Gaul, and now quite a lot of what is now Germany, or Germania. We'll move on to 117 AD. Now remember, this is the point at which the Roman Empire is at its largest. And you can see they've conquered more of Germania and more of Britannia. And this is the point that we're really interested in, because within this red line, in fact, just at this edge, is where we live. Well, have a look at the last slide on the map, 305 AD, and I want you to look carefully to see if the Roman Empire gets bigger or smaller at this point. Oh, you see, there's been a chunk taken out of it here. At this point, the Roman Empire starts to encounter problems, and people start to fight back and take the lands back that they think are theirs.
Okay, for the rest of this lesson, I want us to look at what happened when the Romans came to Britannia. Here's a video from the BBC.
After the Romans landed in Britain in 43 AD, the army gradually conquered more and more land. Large numbers of soldiers were based in the north of England, keeping an eye on one of the Roman Empire's furthest frontiers. When Emperor Hadrian visited Britain in 122 AD, he decided a wall should be built to mark this boundary and keep the Scots away. It was 120 kilometers long and called Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall was built by the Roman army. The soldiers constructed and protected it and lived in forts alongside it. Once built, this magnificent structure marked the edge of the Roman Empire. Apart from when Emperor Antonius Pius built a second wall further north. The Antonine Wall was occupied by the Romans for 20 years, but they eventually retreated to Hadrian's Wall and remained there for the rest of their time in Britain.
And finally today, your task is to make a map of Hadrian's Wall. But today's task is to do with mapping. Your challenge is going to be to make a map of Hadrian's Wall as it was in 128 AD. Your first challenge today is to draw the route of Hadrian's Wall. So you can see here we've got a map of the whole bit of the British Isles. Then this part within the dotted line is enlarged into this map. So we're going to use this map, which is in your email today, to see where the route is. And we can see it goes from this part here, the Solway, where the little chin of Scotland comes down to the neck, and it goes almost in a straight line, just a slight kink, over to the east coast where we live. So very carefully on both the little map and the big map, we are going to draw the route of Hadrian's Wall, just like that. First thing we want to do today is show the area that belonged to the Romans and the area that belonged to the Celts. Now I'm going to use a red pen to show the areas where the Romans lived. So in my key, I'm going to draw red. And where did the Romans conquer? Can you remember the video from the BBC? So they conquered all the way up to Hadrian's Wall. I'm not going to colour it all in. I'm going to use some maths colouring. I'm just going to do some dotted lines to show that these were the areas that the Romans conquered. And let's not forget this little map either. as the Romans conquered all of Britain up to the wall. And what colour should I use for the Celts? I want a colour that's very different from red, so I think, like the map, I'm going to use green. So I must remember to colour in my key in the green colour. And then in the little map, the Romans never conquered Wales, or as they called it, Hibernia, or Scotland. Your next challenge today is to use this map to mark some of the forts on the wall. So I'm going to start over in the east side with Arbeia. So on this map, right on the east end, actually just below the wall, I'm going to draw a circle. And then I'm going to use my pen to label Arbeia. And then I think I'm going to mark Segedunum as well, which is right at the start of the wall. So a bit further along, I'm going to do that block. I'm going to use my line to say Segedunum. You might recognise one or two of these names. Then I think I want to go further along the wall to about the middle. And I'm going to go for one of the forts that I've actually been to. If you remember at the start of the year, I showed you pictures of my visit to this place. Housesteads, an absolutely brilliant Roman fort. So it's about halfway across the wall. I'm going to do that there. And again, I will use my highlighter to draw a neat line and call that Housesteads. Then another of my very favourite places just behind the wall. Here, I'll come up here this time, is Vindolanda. But remember, there were forts all along the wall. Perhaps you could put some different forts onto your map. Once you've made your map of Hadrian's Wall, you don't have to stop there. I've got a couple of questions for you which I think could be really interesting. First of all, can you find out what the names are of the modern places where Segedunum Fort and Arbeia Fort were? One of them, you'll know, I used to go to school in, and the other one might be very close to where some of you live. Secondly, you might like to research what life was like on some of the forts. I can particularly recommend the websites of Housesteads Fort, which has some excellent information about how the Romans ruled Britain for such a long time. And for another extension, you could use this map of modern Europe and this map of Europe in 117 AD, when, remember, the Roman Empire was at its biggest, to compare some of the place names then and now. Can you remember, for instance, what the Romans used to call Spain? Okay, that's it for today's history lesson, year 4. I'll see you next week with some more history.